My name is Eric DeVries, dental CPA and founder of ForSaleByDentist.com. In today's video, we're going to talk about setting the sales price of a dental practice for an individual buyer. Now, there's lots of different buyers out there with different strategies and price points and so forth. But today's video, we're going to be talking about an individual buyer coming in to do the chairside work in that practice. So recently, I had a doctor wants to sell his practice, and he wants 130% of collections, and he says that's what the market is. Well, first of all, no, it's not what the market is, but it made me think that if there's this perception of what is market value, right? And again, market value is just what one buyer and one seller are willing to agree upon, right? So, 130% of collections could happen, absolutely, no problem, but it's not necessarily what's taking place in the market right now on that individual buyer. So, quick caveat, I look at a lot of deals across the country, more than one or two a day. As far as the closings, like me being a part of a deal, one or two a week. So I see a lot, right? So let's talk about this. So the seller wants 130% of collections. Well, how does that happen? It could happen, but let's talk about what the process is. More than the lion's share of deals that take place over 500,000 are financed in some capacity, usually with traditional banks, right? So the banks love dental practice acquisitions. They love it. It's a very safe play, and they love it so much that they'll do a deal with 0% down from the purchaser, from the dentist, if they're going to stay and do the chair side. So that's fantastic. Now, there are some quid pro quos and things that they look for, right, in these financing deals. Typically, they want to make sure that it cash flows. And remember, if the doctor's going to stay on, there's the profit piece and there's the chairside clinical piece together to create the cash flow for the buyer. They look at that. Typically, they want to see 2 times, or what would that be? 1/2 that they could recoup in 2 years is a rule of thumb. Another rule of thumb, they kind of have a choke point traditionally up to about 90% of collections, your traditional banks. You usually see deals somewhere at the end of the day between 60 and 90%. Now, recently, that's changed. Over the last 12 months, the banks have started to relax that requirement, and some banks are going all the way up to 100% of average collections. Okay, so that's relatively new. The brokers are catching on to it, and the deals that are taking place in the more desirable locations are starting to creep up to 100% of collections. You're starting to see that in the marketplace right now. Well, why is that important? Well, typically the buyer has debt loads, right? They've got student loans, they might have a mortgage, and now they're going to take on this big practice debt as well. So they don't necessarily have a lot of cash to bring to the table. So they love the 0%, zero cash down, right? And that's where the traditional bank comes in, and that's 70 to 100% of collections, provided that it cash flows and everything else makes sense. So you can't look at each one of these in a vacuum. I'm just kind of talking about big figures here. So let's get back to my seller that wants 130% of collections. Could that deal happen? Absolutely, right? You see it in the housing market. A house wants $2 million and nobody else is on that street near close to that, but they just need one buyer, right? Same with the dental practice. He just needs, or she just needs, one buyer. So let's look at it from the buyer's perspective, okay? So she comes in, it's $1 million practice. They want 1.3 million. I'm using round numbers here, 130%. Well, the banks probably may go up to 100%. So, there's a $300,000 shortfall. Well, there's 2 ways that could usually happen. One is the seller would take a note, right? And the banks are going to want that note to match their note, right? So if the bank is going to have a 10-year at, let's say, 4%, 4.5%, they're going to want the seller to carry that same note, 10-year, 4.5%. Now, you could have a prepay on that over a course of time, but at closing, that's how it's going to work. They're going to have a note set up that's similar to the bank's note. So in this case, it would be a $300,000 note. They would have $1 million note with the bank, $300,000 with the seller. There you go. The seller might not want that. The other way would be the buyer to come at cash at close, right? So then the buyer would have to come up with $300,000 at closing to make that 1.3 work. Could it happen? Sure. Should it happen? Maybe. But you just got to ask yourself, do you want to pay that premium? And maybe, right, if it's in the right location, it's a 10-year lease, it's got your cone beam, your laser, it's digital, it's everything you wanted. Okay, maybe the premium makes sense. Absolutely, right? You amortize that over 10 years, $30,000 a year plus interest. Okay, maybe we could do that deal. So it's possible to have a deal go through at 130%. Is it the norm? No, right? And the norm usually comes back to what the banks are willing to finance at zero cash down, right? For these dental, the new buyers. And whereas that, it traditionally was somewhere between 70 and 90 cents on the dollar. Recently, it's gone up to 100%. Have I seen traditional banks lend more than 100%? Yes, I have. Those are outliers, though. Those are not the norm. So you should not be expecting that to happen on your deal. But have I seen it? Sure. Yeah, I've seen it. I've seen 105, less than 110%. But again, those are very rare. So when my seller wants 130%, sure, we could do it. We could list it. But you're looking at an uphill battle from a financing. You got to have a buyer that has the cash, or the seller has to hold the note. One of those two has to happen. Could it happen? Absolutely. But it's definitely not the market trends. What we're seeing in the marketplace right now is, somewhere between 70 and 90, and recently up to 100% on the deals that are primo. Okay, does that make sense? I just want to share some tidbits on what's going on buying a dental practice in 2022. Eric DeVries, Dental CPA, wishing you continued success. Thanks.